live there, and then I'm going to let our participants in.
Do about that sunlight. It's going to be there for a few minutes.
Awesome.
I can't do anything about it. Too late.
Okay, so if you're just joining us, I know we actually have a pretty full waiting room. My name is Heather Buen. What you're seeing on the screen is you're in the right place if you're here for the virtual joint town hall with our two Democratic candidates for railroad commissioner. I know that Deborah Peoples is on the call, but really quickly, what I wanted to let everybody know, whether you're on Facebook or you're on the Zoom chat, if you could mute yourselves, that would be great. We have our candidates as well as our great moderator, Roman McAllen, who will be moderating this event for us. If you do have questions or technical issues and you're on the
Speaking of technical issues, that looks like Heather is locked up there. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yep. We can't hear anything right now. This is Deborah Peoples.
Oh, hi, Ms. Peoples.
Hello.
Nice to hear from you.
Yes, we're pretty excited today. And so I know that Heather is working to get this cleared out. I just want to tell you that 2020, despite everything that has happened, is going to be an amazing year for us. We're going to elect the Democrats up and down the ballot, and we absolutely are going to have a Democratic commissioner, a railroad commissioner. And so we are thrilled tonight to be able to bring two amazing candidates to you. As you know, the runoff is on July 14th. We haven't, so both of you need to know, okay, that we have not been sitting on our hands in Tarrant County. We refuse to let the pandemic keep us down. We've stayed on the phone. We have continued to work on getting our senior voters to be able to vote by mail, and that includes me. We have been calling people to make sure that they're right. We're going to have 182 voting locations. And so we're encouraging people to not only vote early from June the 29th through July the 10th, and that will lessen some of the impact of COVID. But on election day, we will ensure that we have the proper PPE for our citizens to get out and exercise their right to vote. Because on July, I think you all can hear my 2-year-old granddaughter. She is ready to go. She's been marching lately, but it is critical on July the 14th that we have 4 races in Tarrant County that are critical that we need to pick our nominees on. That's the U.S. Senate, that is the Texas Railroad Commission, that is US 24, US Representative 24, and a Constable Precinct 5. And so we are going all out on these elections. And so Roman, I am grateful to you for joining us tonight to act as an MC for this call and to introduce us to these two fabulous candidates. So I'm going to sit back, be quiet, and listen to what they have to say. So welcome, Roman.
Hey, Roman, can you hear me?
Yes, just fine.
Okay, yeah, I had technical difficulties on my end. Luckily, I had my backup, so I am back on. I mean, I'm going to introduce you, Roman, if you don't mind. So if you're not familiar, in our 2018 election, Roman McAllen was our Democratic candidate for Railroad Commissioner. He previously served as Historic Preservation Officer for the city of Denton, and he is currently the Historic Preservation Officer for the city of Houston. So he's worked for the city of Brownsville as a Historic Preservation Officer, as well as a planner. Roman holds a master's degree in architecture from UT Austin. And so just to take it away, Roman, introducing Roman McAllen, our moderator for tonight's event.
Well, thank you very much, Heather. And thank you very much, Ms. Peoples. Good to see everybody. So we're here again for the virtual town hall meeting between, and we have two special guests, Chrysta Castañeda and Roberto Beto Alonzo. Both are Democrats who are in a runoff election. The runoff election takes place on July the 14th of 2020. Early voting, it also begins on June 29th. So later this month, late this month, you've already got it on your calendar. You're ready to vote. And you're going to make sure if you don't make it at the end of early voting, you're voting on July 14th, and you'll be voting on your ballot. Everyone in Texas who can hear my voice and is older than 18 years of age or 17 and a half is going to be voting for either Roberto Alonzo or Chrysta Castañeda for Railroad Commissioner. And this is a very important race. Railroad Commission, next to the Lieutenant Governor, is the most important position in the state of Texas as far as I'm concerned. If you haven't taken the time to read an interesting book that really is a history book about Texas, you want to read Spindletop. Spindletop is the story of the evolution of the production of oil and gas in Texas. And if you're in a city like Houston or Dallas, you see the names in this book. These are the names of the people that founded our universities, founded our hospitals. This oil and gas is critical to the state and critical to the country. And so there's a lot you can learn about oil and gas, but the bottom line is remember that the Railroad Commission of Texas has nothing to do with railroads. It has everything to do with oil and gas regulations. So if you care about the environment, if you care about future generations in Texas, this is a critically important race. Please tell your friends about it, talk about it, ask them, have you heard about the Railroad Commission and how important it is? So I'm really honored today to be introducing two people. We have Roberto Beto Alonzo. He has spent 20 years as a state legislator, and he served on several legislative committees, including the Calendars Committee, Pensions, Higher Education, Judicial Affairs, and Transportation. He really began activism in politics at the University of Texas, where in 1978, he was the first Hispanic to win for the president of the student government of the University of Texas at Austin. He has served as a community leader on the Dallas Area Rapid Transportation Board, the Permits Committee, and as an advocate for many community causes. He's a lifelong Democrat. He's held many leadership positions and served in many different organizations, including the Texas Mexican American Democrats. He's been to the National Democratic Convention 8 times as a delegate. He is was the national president of the Labor Caucus of the state, and he is a delegate to this year's 2020 Democratic Convention. Now, Christic Castaneda, let me just use a little technology here and jump back. She is an engineer, a lawyer, and a community leader, and a mother. She received her degree in industrial engineering from Kansas State University. She later earned a law degree from Southern Methodist University from the Dedman School of Law, where she graduated cum laude. She's a founding partner of her own firm in Dallas, Texas, which has focused on oil and gas litigation in the upstream sector, as well as commercial litigation, products liability disputes involving technical evidence. In addition to her successful career, she has held leadership positions in a variety of nonprofit agencies focusing on improving women's lives. She's a board member of the Texas Women's Foundation and has previously served as board chair of Ignite Texas, a nonpartisan organization focused on building political ambition in young women. So it's a real honor to meet you, and virtually both of you, having been in your seat a couple of years ago. So let me just jump to the run of the show tonight. We've had the introductions, and at this point, we'd like to just have the candidates speak up and talk about themselves a bit here. I want to go over to, I want to ask a general question. Well, let me go 1 second here. It's hard to have this up. Just why, so I'll start with Beto, Mr. Alonzo. The question is, why is the Railroad Commission called the Railroad Commission? And when they have nothing to do with railroads, why is that the case?
Well, You who have read the book and know about the history know that when it started, this organization, this commission had to do with railroad. Through the years, it changed, and now it deals with oil and gas. And personally, having been involved with this topic, as a legislator, so you'll know, knowing that this commission doesn't deal with railroads, I sponsored and debated on the floor of the House through many environmental groups that encouraged and supported the concept, and I did it on the floor of the House to change it from the Railroad Commission to the Oil and Gas Commission, so folks don't have to explain like we're trying to do today. This commission deals with oil and gas. Let's talk about oil and gas and how they can help the environment. So that's it. That's the deal.
Thank you, Mr. Alonzo.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Castañeda, it's nice to meet you. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so the Railroad Commission is over 100 years old. It's one of our longest standing agencies. And the answer to your question is, why is it called the Railroad Commission, is because back when it was founded over 100 years ago, the grain farmers were having trouble getting access to common carrier railroads. And so they had a commission set up in order to give them equal access to capacity and shipping. And then over the years, as we added the oil and gas portfolio and other mining related activities, and the federal government took over all of the railroad related regulations, it transitioned to where in 2005 it no longer had anything to do with railroads, and now of course has everything to do with oil and gas. One of our most important industries here in Texas, has a tremendous amount of responsibility for preservation of our natural resources, which is its #1 job, as well as protecting our environment and health and safety issues relating to oil and gas extraction. So it is misnamed, but by the time I'm done running in November, I hope everyone will know exactly what the Railroad Commission does and how important it is. And you had great words on that, Roman.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. I appreciate it, y'all. I want to just give a minute here, since I didn't, just to allow you to introduce yourselves and perhaps tell us why you're running for the Railroad Commission. So I'll start with you, Chrysta.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I've got over 30 years of experience in and around the industry, both as an engineer and as an oil and gas attorney. And I had been asked by state party leadership to look at this race a couple of times and decided this is the time, this is now, we can win this race statewide for the first time in over 25 years, have a Democrat elected statewide. This is one of our best opportunities, and we need to make a difference. It was the coalescence of the urgent need for us to do better for our environment with my expertise and my background that really led me to decide I am going to step up and I am going to try to do something better for all of Texas at the Railroad Commission. And I say the urgency of now because what's going on? We're all looking at each other on Zoom and we're not driving anywhere. The Railroad Commission has jurisdiction over the oil and gas industry, which is currently in free fall. We are shedding jobs. Hundreds of thousands of jobs will be lost in the industry as a result of the oversupply of oil and the crash of prices. Furthermore, the Railroad Commission is not doing what it needs to do in terms of prorating supply. Again, back to what I said, the #1 job of the Railroad Commission is to make sure that we protect our natural resources and that we don't produce resources that don't have a market. That's been the function of the Railroad Commission since the 1930s, and it was used heavily after the Great Depression. So the Railroad Commission is not doing its job. The Republicans are simply letting free market do whatever it's going to do. The free markets are not working right now. Our environment is in a mess and somebody has to fix it. And I was willing to step up and be the one to fix it. I assume, Roman, that you're going to give us plenty of time to discuss what our policy proposals are, but my #1 proposals are to fix flaring and venting of methane, which are two tremendous destructive forces in our environment, and they don't need to be done. And it's something that the Railroad Commission has regulations on the books to take care of right now.
Thank you very much, Kristen. We'll take that up probably right after we allow Mr. Alonzo to introduce himself. You've mentioned it. It's unbelievable. If you realized how much money the state is losing with the flaring that's going on that you don't know about even. It's just horrible. But Mr. Alonzo, I'd like to ask you to please introduce yourself and talk about why you're running for the office.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for running, because you created the stepping stone to allow us to say that we have an opportunity. And I can tell you, besides your work, even though we're superly qualified, the bottom line is the reason we're having an opportunity to win is somebody by the name of Beto made it happen. He spent over $80 million. And even though we can pretend to try to do that, I think the most that each of us are going to probably spend is over $100,000 on a race that cost over $2 million. So first of all, I thank you for running, for creating that opportunity to where we're at. Second, I thank Beto. Now, why am I running? I think we don't need oil and gas people running, or people that work for oil and gas or represent oil and gas. I think we need somebody that has what we're saying. Like we talked about at the beginning, I think the chairwoman for mentioning and knowing that there's an opportunity to elect a Democrat with democratic values, not oil and gas values, with democratic background, with democratic history, with democratic involvement, and democratic policy. As I mentioned, we dealt with it in the 20 years. So I'm running because I think we need to put a Democrat with democratic values, democratic background in the election. I know when you ran, as you talked about the environment, that's what you were gonna bring to the table, Democrat values. So I'm the candidate that has the Democrat background, Democrat values. But in the end, I thank you and Beto for creating this opportunity. And I know we have a good opportunity because Texas is a battleground state for Democrats, not for us, for the whole Democratic Party. And here we are today, and we're gonna make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alonzo. Well, I have to turn that back on you. It's not on me.
Yes, it is.
I'm on your shoulders. It's really not on me. I worked full time and ran in 2016 after the election of the president. I couldn't take it anymore, and so like a lot of people, I stepped out to run for something. But
thank you.
I stand on the shoulders of other people. So coming back to the topic, I think it is a really critical that Chrysta is talking about, this flaring. First, I'd ask Chrysta, would you explain when flaring is done and why it's done? But let me step back from that. For those of you watching this video, if you're not watching us live today, there's a thing called the severance tax in the state of Texas, and it's critical. This severance tax is a tax on the extraction of non-renewable resources such as natural gas and oil from anywhere in the state of Texas. This is not the permanent university fund, which is extraction from oil and gas from state lands. This is all lands in Texas, if I understand it right. And so this is anywhere in Texas that you're extracting an oil gas. You pay a % of the market value of those resources that you take out to the state of Texas. So there's a link between, in my mind, between this idea of a severance tax and the flaring. And so flaring has a very direct cost to the state, as not only environmentally, but straight to the budget. Chrysta, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, you're absolutely right, Roman. Let me first start with what flaring is. You asked that question. Flaring is the intentional lighting on fire of natural gas. And in the Permian, it comes up with the oil. They want the oil because it's worth more, at least historically, if not right now. So they produce the oil and immediately light the natural gas that comes up on fire because it's worth less than it costs to move it to market. So what are we doing? We are lighting on fire enough natural gas that if we converted it to electricity, which is my plan, that it would power the city of Houston. Let me say that again, enough to power the city of Houston. It is an incredible waste of our natural resources. Furthermore, the operators, if they would convert it to electricity, they have to take power out of the grid to supply their own operational needs. They could use this through microgeneration of electricity for their own needs and put the excess into the grid where we could send it down to Houston. And on hot summer days, such are coming really quickly, we would not be calling up coal-fired power as we had to do last year. It is an enormous stain on our state's environmental health, including air pollution, water pollution, ground pollution. It causes asthma, it causes cancer. We've got to eliminate this, and responsible players in the industry know that it can be eliminated. You are right that the flared gas is not subject to a severance tax. That could be changed. You are also probably talking about the fact that we earn royalties as a state off of the state-owned lands, and we need to make sure that flared gas is subject to those royalties as well, because 20% of our budget comes from severance taxes and royalties on state-owned lands. We don't have a way to plug that hole, and those revenues have gone dramatically down in the area of COVID-19. Let me just amplify one thing. I have been a Democrat my entire life. I have been a Democratic activist my entire life. I have run for Congress as a Democrat because why? In 2012, 9 men filed for an open seat, and there was not a woman to stand up and do it. And in fact, it's the 33rd that runs right there into Tarrant County, from my house in West Dallas over to Tarrant County. Now, there was another woman who ran. We both ran great races. Neither of us won, but we needed to step up for women, and that's what I was proud to do. I've been standing up for women and getting young women who are in underserved communities to express their interest in politics, to become educated in politics, to step up and run, and we have actually elected those young women to public office. That's my Democratic bona fides. I am endorsed by Progress Texas, Annie's List, almost all of the clubs and orgs around the state. So when we talk about Democrat values, I live them every day.
Thank you, Chrysta, and thank you for those efforts. I know that's extremely important, that women be involved in politics, involved in all facets of our life here, while we're all here together. I know it makes for a better world myself. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Alonzo, do you have on the flaring issue, any other things that you'd like to talk about?
Sure. As we know, we need to be clear that this flaring does cause a lot of environmental problems, and I want to thank the environmental groups for providing us tons of information. We don't have to do the research. We don't have to ask. They've done through the years and testified and provided information, for example, saying that unflit flares and intense tank venting is widespread, wasting product and harming health, because methane is 84 times more potent. So yes, we want to fix the problem. And yes, even if we provide different opportunities of the use, we also, more important, have to make sure that we keep an eye. And that's why I say I bring not only that I've lived democratically, but I've lived and exercised and governed democratic. Whereas we bring to the table of being in the environmental commission. I mean, the railroad commission, that we look at these things and what they're doing. Like, in a discussion, I know that the oil and gas companies use the market, the free market, to try to decide, and they could if they wanted. They could if they wanted. In fact, ever since, for many years, since 1982, Exxon has known of how all these global temperatures have caused problems. They know it. They can do it on their own if they wanted to. And one of the things that Texas has done, they've given companies to fight amongst themselves, hire lawyers and do what they got to do in court, but they don't do it. So that's why we as Democrats are running to get a Democrat perspective on the Railroad Commission. And yet, I'm from the area of the 33rd Congressional District, Congressman Mark Vesey. I almost ran for that race. And there was a whole bunch of folks that ran, and at the end, Congressman Vesey was in the runoff. So knowing that he was the best candidate, I supported him, and a bunch of my friends supported. That's what I'm talking about, putting people like Congressman Mark Vesey, who's from your part of the world, Fort Worth. He's one of our champions. He's not part of the majority that's creating a lot of opportunities in the House. And that's the opportunity and results I want to do at the Railroad Commission. Thank you, Congressman Mark Vesey. And I know all of you from Fort Worth. love his work. And I can tell you this, even though only a portion of his district is in our part of the world, where I live in Dallas, he's still our congressman. He's our champion, and we'll continue to support him. And we're going to support him again in November. Thank you, Congressman VC from Fort Worth. And thank you, all of you, for creating that opportunity for the congressman to be one of our champions in creating good opportunities for us here in Texas. And as you will see, you'll see him all over the place already supporting the candidate for president and a whole bunch of Democrats, as he has been very talkative, very informed, very involved. And that's the kind of work I want to work with the Congressman VC to make everything possible that is good for us Democrats. Thank you.
Can't hear you. You're on mute, Roman.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you very much. I'm going to stick with you just a minute, Roberto, and going kind of to your experience there in the Texas legislature.
Yes, sir.
My opponent in 2016, it was Commissioner Christic Castaneda. She was investigated in 2018 for potential conflicts of interest. In fact, I think it was the Texas Tribune or the Austin American Statesman, I can't remember which one, did the extensive research to find out that she had taken essentially over 400 unethical votes, voting on issues before the Railroad Commission in which her family oil company had interests. I wonder about this. You as a state legislature, what did you do in your time there with regard to the conflicts of interest that are so evident, that have gone on this commission for so long? Did you have time to address those issues?
Sure, of course, yeah. So when we're in the legislature, we work with environmental groups on the issues that I'm talking about, including conflict of interest. My role was to work on changing the name. I repeat, changing the name from the oil and gas, from the Railroad Commission to oil and gas. Other friends on the floor presented how we could change legislation to, stop the conflict of interest. In fact, in this race, 3 of the 4 candidates, Kelly Stone, myself, and Mark Watson, said, we're not going to take money. We're not going to get hired by the oil and gas company. So 3 of us said no. And why is that important? Because we all know, and the research shows by the environmental groups that you're talking about, how the oil and gas companies run the Railroad Commission, how even the staff of the Railroad Commission that presents ways how we can protect the environment because of the power in the oil and gas companies, they overrule the staff and vote in ways to help the oil and gas companies. So yes, I supported legislation. Of course, we didn't get it passed, but not only did I support legislation as a candidate, I supported the concept. In fact, Mark Watson, who was one of the candidates running and that has endorsed me, and Kelly Stone, who was also running, both supported the concept. We're not going to take funding or jobs from oil and gas companies, so we can let the folks know out there that we support democratic values, that we want to look out for the people. Right now, as you have pointed out, the Railroad Commission is run by the oil and gas companies. To give you the last example, recently, Railroad Commission put up a task force about how we can help with the oil and gas situation as we're dealing with coronavirus. So who did they put on that commission? 100% oil and gas associations. I support the concept. Not only, that's fine. You can have their involvement, but we got to have the public. We got to have elected officials, local and state, that can also provide that information. Because as far as research and background, and the environmental groups that will show you, that done the research on how the staff and the folks that work for the Railroad Commission do a good job, but it's not the work that they do, is the implementation of the work. So yes, I support to make sure we make better laws that deal with conflict of interest. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Roberto. Chrysta, would you like to address the issue about conflicts of interest, and particularly my opponent, the chair, so blatantly violating what, if not the law, certainly ethical activity?
Sure, and let me just explain that for the listeners. Christy Craddock owns interest in oil and gas properties. And so when she votes to allow wells to be drilled in a certain area or certain spacing rules to be enacted relating to, fields of oil and gas wells, she is voting for her own economic interest directly, or at least that's the allegation. I know that, Roman, you did a study of that, and you looked to see what the overlap was between her voting and her interests. That's a direct conflict of interest. I would agree with that. And we shouldn't be enacting regulations if we have a direct conflict of interest. Here's my situation. I am not paid by oil and gas companies. I represent people against oil and gas companies. I have a $146 million verdict against oil and gas companies in the heart of the Permian. That's where I get my expertise. That's where I get my experience, is from suing oil and gas companies and knowing how they do their business. It's not enough to hold up a research paper and said, I've read it. I understand from a deep place that how these people do their business and what they can do better. And I know who wants to do better, and I know who you have to push to do better. So that's where my experience comes from. In terms of funding of campaigns from the oil and gas industry, my friend Rafael and Chia had a great proposal for how we could restructure campaign finance, particularly as it relates to commission races. Here's what is true. There are many good Democrats who are employed in around the oil and gas industry. I have taken no money from oil and gas company PACs. But if there are people in this industry who want us to be doing better at the Railroad Commission and support me, a certified progressive with Progress Texas, then I'm all for it. Let's have a broad consortium of people have us make a better change at the Texas Railroad Commission, and let's make this better for all Texans right now. So that's my position on these issues. If there were ever a case in which I had a client in an oil and gas related context, and I was called upon as a commissioner to vote against or in for that person that was involved in litigation, then I would either recuse myself from the client representation or recuse myself from the vote. That's how we would deal with conflicts of interest. But I want to offer my expertise as an engineer and as an attorney working in and around this industry for over 30 years to step right into this incredibly important role with the knowledge and skill that I have to take on the industry on these very important environmental issues. It's a complex subject. I'm the one who's suited for it, and that's why all of the newspapers around Texas have endorsed me as the qualified candidate.
Thank you, Chrysta. Thank you very much. There's so many important issues tied to this. I want to get to an important topic. We're at about the halfway point. We've got about 27 minutes to go. Water. When I was thinking of running for Railroad Commission, I talked to one of the former candidates who ran in the 70s. Who's now a county prosecutor, and his name has escaped me at the moment to come to me. And the fact is, there's a lot of water used in the production. So I'll stick with you, Chrysta. Would you talk about how water is used in production? And especially a concern to me is in the fracking process, just exactly how much water we're using. And then maybe that might lead to injection wells. So on the topic of the usage of our water and the danger to our environment. And let me just pause for a minute again, just as an exciting point to mention, this is critically important. Massive amounts of water get used in the oil industry, and Chris is going to tell us how that happens.
Yeah, so when you are drilling wells in a fracking related environment, you drill down a vertical hole, then you drill sideways, and you put a perf gun after you've placed all the tubing and casing, and you blow holes where you want the holes to be to reach the oil and gas shales that you want to perforate. So you perforate by using tens of thousands of gallons of high pressure water mixed with certain chemicals and other frac related substances, and you push them into those holes and you break open the rock. Okay, it takes massive amounts of fresh water to do this. Then you pull the water back out, and a lot of times they will just put the used water down a salt water disposal well. There's two problems with that. One, we can clean up that water and reuse it, and we need to incentivize that cleanup and reuse. Number two, you're threatening the existence of aquifers and groundwater if you are not doing this process responsibly. And three, when you put the water back down the hole, when you're disposing of it, if you do it wrong or in the wrong place, then you can create earthquakes. That's called induced seismicity. The Railroad Commission has known for 15 years at least about this problem. And for a while you would hear the scientists talk about it, and then the Republicans became, so much in charge that you wouldn't hear the scientists talk about these issues. When I'm a railroad commissioner, we're going to talk about these issues. We're going to talk about it a lot. We are going to make sure that we have the data for the operators to know when they are in proximity to these fault lines, and so that they're not putting that water back down the hole in a place that's going to create seismic events. We can make sure that we are reusing that water, and that we are cleaning it up, and we are not pulling more fresh water than is absolutely necessary to do these kinds of operations. I'll finish with this thought. A lot of people ask me, well, why not just stop all fracking? Well, if we stop all fracking right now in Texas, here's what happens. These companies go out of business. Some people would like that from an environmental perspective, but here's what they don't recognize. All of that infrastructure that exists to support the oil and gas industry, the tanks, the wells, the pipelines, the pump jacks, all of that has to be remediated. It needs to be decommissioned responsibly and plugged before we stop extracting fossil fuels entirely. Because if we do not fund the remediation of this infrastructure, we will have the largest unfunded environmental liability the world has ever seen. So we need to make sure that as we are still doing these fracking operations, that we do it responsibly, including on the water issue. Roman, that's a great question. And it's on my website if you want more information on my position.
Thank you, Chrysta. Thank you. And Roberto, on the topic of water, would you like to add something to that?
The only thing I'll add is focus on this. First of all, I'm going to repeat, even though you call it a research paper, people have done good work. I respect the environmentalists, by saying it's nothing. This is a lot of work to many, many years that have kept an eye on the Railroad Commission, because none of us that are in this audience, including the candidates, have done the work day to day that it has to be done. And then, as far as being qualified, so why are we running? Why are we running? Let's just select a Republican candidate that's already an oil and gas owner. Let's select a Republican candidate that works for the oil and gas companies. It's not only about being qualified, it's about the democratic values that we're bringing to the table. And the key word that we have here is, as we deal with the water issue and the pipelines and the ground disposal reuse, it's about being responsible. It's about being responsible. As I talk about this research, it'll tell you again how the Railroad Commission says, having the information right now, we don't have to do more research. We can add to the research, but it's already there. We're going to have people that are not going to have skills, but are going to have the responsibility, the democratic values. They're going to take a perspective of being responsible, look out for the people, look out for the environment. So yes, as it relates to water, I think we should be responsible in how we use it, what's happening, and how we follow through. And that's where a Democratic candidate coming to the Railroad Commission has to bring that to the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. Let's, on the topic there about, it sounds like you're kind of touching on, this race with the Republicans, which I think the Democrats do have a strong opportunity to win statewide here in Texas, and God willing to also have a Democrat win for the United States presidency. But I want to ask you, and this really is critical. How do you think you are going to be able to beat your opponent? The Republican opponent in this case, I believe, is Jim Wright, who probably won because he's named the same name as the former United States Congressman from Texas, right? if I remember correctly. I may have that wrong.
Fort Worth.
Speaker of the House from Fort Worth.
There
So
you go.
strange as it may be, it appears that that's how he won,
that's the
because
truth.
he only had a small amount of money, $30,000 or $40,000 against who? I'm sorry, his name's even. I'm sorry, the
I forgot too.
the incumbent who's on his way out. And so I want to ask you, Roberto, how do you intend to win statewide in November if you are fortunate enough to win this July 14th, 2020 primary?
You know, as we go around doing these Zoom-in debates, besides that question, the question that gets asked at all the debates are two things. What are your values and how are you going to win? My response, as you pointed out in my introduction, is right there, democratic values, democratic values, democratic values. Now we go to the issue of how to win. One of the guys that taught us, and he taught us, okay, because it wasn't until 2 years ago, people said, boom, we can win. And we can win not only in the state, in Fort Worth, in Tarrant County. He won Tarrant County. For the first time in many, many years, he won Tarrant County. Tarrant County is blue. Why? Because of a guy named Beto. So you were pointing out, right? Jim, right? What do I bring to the table? One of the things that people talk a lot about is, why don't we get Hispanics to vote? Well, one of the things that Hispanic ask is that they have a candidate that they can vote for. Somebody that's like them, that grew up like them, thinks like them, is like them, and has the history. My history, I grew up in Crystal City, the Chicano movement. In 1969, at 12 years old, we walked out for 3 weeks to ask for rights in 1969 in Crystal City. In 1978, as you pointed out, I was elected student body president. In 1992, I was the first Hispanic in North Texas elected state representative, and the list goes on and on. So what do I bring to the table? To complement the statewide ticket that we already have, that's approximately 6 women, that will, by adding me to the ticket, it will be a Mexican-American person on the ticket, to complement all those different chunks of votes, women, African-Americans, environmentalists. My chunk is to encourage the Mexican-Americans to vote. So complementing, doing all this work that Beto has already started, and follow through and make it happen, not only for the Railroad Commission, for the President of the United States, for all the statewide Court of Appeals and Supreme Court judges, for the US Senate, for all the candidates running in Tarrant County. That's what I bring to the table, a complement to the statewide ticket. People have been asking for it. I'm here to be a part of it to make it happen.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Fort Worth. Thank you, Tarrant County.
Chris, I'd like to ask you that question now. You know, this is the most winnable race, the most winnable opportunity, I would suppose, for the Democratic Party in the race for Railroad Commission this year. It appears to be the case, right? The incumbent lost in his primary to a person that didn't spend a lot of money, and then the man in the White House. So this looks like a good opportunity. Yet we know it's still, the odds are against us. We know rural Texans in particular will come out in force. Rural Texans will come out and vote for Donald Trump. They'll vote for John Cornyn, and they'll vote for your opponent in this race. So how is it that you're going to win statewide? What's your plan?
Well, first of all, I have raised more money than any Democrat has raised running for the Railroad Commission in decades. So, Roman, I appreciate your efforts. It's not an easy race to raise that money for, but I am raising that money, and I will have spent over $100,000 just for the primary. I hope to raise many, many times that before the November election because I want to make this race competitive. The second thing is I'm working. I'm working every day. I have Facebook events and virtual town halls every Tuesday at 5 p.m. so I can get this message out. I have built the audience we need in order to win this race in November. I'm reaching out to the Democratic faithful every single week. I'm working. And in fact, when we talk about work, my opponent lost his election as an incumbent sitting for the House because he didn't do the work. So I'm the one who's actually doing the work, and I'm bringing my 30 years of experience and hard work to bear on this race. I think it's important that it just be said. In the Texas Democratic Party convention last week, we had the Hispanic caucus. I spoke, Mr. Alonzo spoke, and they did a straw poll. I won 60-40. So I believe that I represent the Democratic values and what at least that segment of 250 people on that day thought is a winning ticket. The incumbent's name was Ryan Sitton. And here's the thing, I've already had an impact. I helped get Ryan Sitton defeated because I raised this issue of flaring. He came out with a report that was widely panned in response to my issue of flaring. And I think it helped ensure his defeat on the Republican side because the Republicans don't want to deal with this issue. When we talk about democratic values, we talk about good things like the environment, which 80% of Texans, not just Democrats, support as one of our fundamental values. So we can win in November if we have a good, strong, hard worker who is willing to take this race over the finish line. And I am that person. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrysta. You know,
that's okay. My name was Christy until I went to law school, and then I decided I needed to go to my given name. And had I known I could have adopted a ballot name, I would have adopted Chrysta, quote, Ann Richards Castañeda.
That's great. Well, I want to stay on this topic because it's critical. If you had a lot of, even with the money you can, that you're going to raise, and folks, if you Democrats out there, whoever wins this primary, please step up and contribute to their campaign. Again, I think this is the most important office in the state of Texas, next to the lieutenant governor. Notice I didn't say the governor, next to the lieutenant governor, which is probably the most powerful position in the state of Texas. But how would you spend the money? How do we get the people in rural Texas? How are the rural Texans going to look at your opponent, then look at you and say, you know what, it's time? How do you get to them? How do you get to them?
Is that for me?
Yes. I want to start with you, and I'll come over to Roberto.
So before I started, before COVID, I went all over the state. I went to Midland a couple of times. I went to the Rio Grande Valley. I went to Amarillo. Okay, I went to Amarillo in January when it's really cold and there are no Democrats out there, but I felt it was very important for me to be seen out there. I have family in the Panhandle. I have long ties to the rural community, grew up on a farm. I am perfectly willing and will travel to those places if we are allowed to travel to those places. If I'm not able to travel to those places, I will do what I've done every Tuesday for the last 6 weeks and will continue to do up until the runoff and then afterwards. And that is do my virtual tour of Texas. Like the real Beto, who made it around to all 254 counties, I have divided the state into segments, and I am getting this message about the oil industry and the Texas Railroad Commission out to every one of those segments of the state, because the issues are slightly different depending on whether you're in the Permian or whether you're in the Rio Grande Valley or whether you're in Houston, where all the corporate entities are. I mean, it just depends on where you are. And so I'm taking this message all around the state. I am reaching out to those rural voters. And here's what else I know. Because of my environmental message and because it's good, old school, clean air, clean water, don't mess with Texas type messages, the moderates are going to vote for us. We have a plan, I have a plan, and I'm going to make sure people know it come November.
That's a great plan. And I hope you tie that too with the women and the young women and getting women and reaching specifically the women in rural Texas. I think that would be a successful way to maneuver it. I know what you mean. I think it's important to get in front of people. I drove over 40,000 miles in the year that I campaigned. Won votes in all 254 counties, 3.62 million votes altogether. more than many of the other statewide candidates on a much smaller budget. And I think what made the difference was getting in front of people as often as I can. I showed up at places that I heard there would be an event. And when I saw the truck with a machine gun in the back and all the red, white, and blue paraphernalia there, I realized I might not have been in the right neighborhood, but I went anyway. And Texans are polite and Texans are good and they respect people who show up. So I think that's a good plan. Roberto, on that topic, assuming the money's there, how do you get out the vote in rural Texans, with rural Texans?
You who went around the state, let me ask you a quick question. Hereford, Texas, which I'm sure you're familiar with, what do you think there's percentage of Hispanics is in Hereford, Texas? Just give me an answer, whatever comes to your mind. Roman.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if
I'm going to answer for you. Okay, I'm going to answer for you because I've been in Hereford, I've been in Amarillo, I've been in Lubbock, I've been in Odessa, I've been in Midland, I've been in Brownfield, all those rural areas. Okay, you know what the percentage of Hispanics is in Hereford, Texas? 90%. I've asked that question a lot of times, and people say 5 or 10% Hispanic. So let me tell you the answer, because I know the folks. Most of the elected Democratic officials in all of West Texas, the Democrats, are Mexican American. You know why? Because through the 80s, the Southwest Border Registration Project that I was a part of and was involved with, did lawsuits, single member district. Now listen, Odessa and Midland have Democratic officials. You know why? Even though Midland and Odessa 70%, 80% Republican for Trump, in those areas we have Democrats. So the answer to your question is this. It's not only about talking to people. Let me tell you, if we just do that, those people that vote right now are going to vote Republican. The same people that have voted are going to vote Republican. So we cannot do what's been done in the past. We got to do it different. We got to go ask the Mexican Americans in all those towns, in all those cities, in all those counties. If the turnout right now is 70% Republican, the places that you've gone through, because they were, right? And 30% Democrat, they may be Mexican Americans and African Americans. You go to East Texas, we have elected officials in the Democratic Party sheriffs that are African American, because most of the whites in that area vote Republican. We respect that. But we got to go get the vote that doesn't come out because they don't get asked to vote. So the answer is this. Like I said, both of us are going to spend at the most $100,000, maybe more. This is a $2 million race just in the primary. It's a $2 million race in the fall. But let me tell you, so you'll feel comfortable and the whole county can feel comfortable, including Tarrant County. This is the battleground state, folks. This is the battleground state. The money and millions of dollars are coming. Why? If you go to Ohio, you go to Michigan, you go to Wisconsin, you go to Florida, you go to Pennsylvania, they spend bucks and they win a smaller amount. This is 38 electoral votes. We, as the candidates, are going to just complement. And what we got to do is complement that effort in that area. I swear to God, I mean it. I've been there. We've organized Mexican American Democrats chapters in that area. We have labor. Let me tell you this. The Texas AFL-CIO, all the unions in Tarrant County support me. I won the endorsement 240,000 to 0. So the complement of what we have with the allies, including the environment, is going to be labor. Labor is going to bring so much money into the state. It's unbelievable. But in rural Texas, we have African Americans and Mexican Americans, and those friends that already voted, we increased the turnout, and it's going to happen. I'll give you an example. In my district, and I know I lost 2 years ago. I got 2,000 votes. In March 3rd, I got 500,000 votes. 500,000, folks. So I'm here. So the slate is clean. As Chrysta mentioned, she ran against Mark Vesey and Domingo Garcia. She lost too. I didn't bring it up, but since she brought it up, and I'll tell you this, like I mentioned in one of the debates, it wasn't the first time I lost. When I ran for re-election in high school, I was student body president, and I lost against a Frenchman, Juanita Hernandez, who claims to this day Oh, I beat Roberto Alonso. But we don't look at the past, we look at the future and we answer your question. There's tons and tons of Mexican Americans in that area. We just gotta work them, we gotta ask them to vote. And now that we have an opportunity, we're gonna spend a whole bunch of effort in Spanish and English to make that happen. So that's the answer to your question. So again, all those cities that I mentioned, like Kerford, Brownfield, La Mesa, 90% Mexican American, 90% population. But it's not the population. We got to make sure they register and they come out. I'm here to provide that opportunity. I'm getting phone calls from Odessa, Lubbock, Midland, Mason, Texas, all that rural area that are friends of mine, former city councilwoman Ana Velez from Mason, Texas, very supportive. So that's the answer to it. Looks beautiful. It looks beautiful. And I'll tell you this, through the years as a state legislator, like I said, we did lawsuits through the Southwest Voter Registration Project to create opportunity for Democrat elected officials because of the Voting Rights Act, But now that we're coming into the election, we need to do the effort and keep it going. It's a beautiful opportunity.
Thank you very much, Roberto. We've only got 4 minutes left, so I'm gonna come back over to Chrysta for some final comments. And I'm gonna have to do it in 2 parts. And first, let me just come 1 second about the rule. It is important to remember that Beto O'Rourke won Tarrant County. He still lost Texas.
Sure.
All the rural counties are gonna be critical in this race. But I wanted to say this, coming forward in November, one of you is gonna, God willing, be on the Railroad Commission of Texas. And so you're the first. I wanna combine that in your first days in the office. What do you plan to do? What's going to be a priority for you when you take office? Where are you going to focus on first? What are your plans to improve? Again, you're 1 vote among 2, but how will you interact and how will you educate the other commissioners and Texans about this important office and improve things within that office? And then just if you want to close after that with anything. And Chrysta, I'd say if you could spend a couple minutes on that, and then I'll come back for closing from Roberto.
I will do that. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Roman, there's also one question that someone had asked from the audience. It was about whether if anyone was going to introduce a bill to rename the commission. So if you could get that one in as well. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer that. Yes, I would be happy to support a bill. However, we won't be introducing the bills because, whoever wins, and it's not the province of the railroad commissioners to introduce that bills. However, I would be more than happy to work with state legislators on these issues. And Senator Jose Rodriguez from El Paso was just on one of my town halls. And I would look forward to working with him, even though he's retiring, on a whole variety of issues. He has very in-depth knowledge about these issues. All right, Roman, back to what do we do the minute I take office? What we do is we immediately stop granting flaring exception permits. So it has been against the law for 100 years, as you know, Roman, for this flaring to go on. It is illegal to vent gas as well. But what the railroad commissioners are doing is they're granting these exception permits. They're handing them out like Tic Tacs. They go through on consent agenda, and therefore there's no contest. Nobody gets to say anything about it. Well, when I'm there, we'll no longer consent. We will at least require the people who are seeking the exception permits to provide certain key information. And again, this is when it comes down to details. Do you have egress capacity, meaning a pipeline that can take that gas away? What is the price at the market where you are? Do you have a connection to the grid and microgeneration capability to put it into the grid? What is the constituency of the gas? Is it sour gas? Do you have to sweeten it? Do we need to give some kind of credit for an amine treatment to get that gas into a generator, to get it into electricity, and to put it on the grid? I mean, there's a whole host of things, but that's one of the very first problems I'm going to tackle. And let me just also mention this. They have already started to respond. Since I've been running on this issue, the Railroad Commission has formed a working group. The industry has formed a working group, and responsible operators are already doing better simply because we are running and I'm talking about this issue. So thank you. That's my first day plan.
Thank you, Chrysta, very much. Roberto, if you could just, we're getting close to time here, but if you could just spend a minute on what your first steps in office would be.
First of all, on the question pertaining to the Oil and Gas Commission, truly the only ones that can do it is the legislature. But me personally, as a state legislator, I did it. I did it. I offered it. I debated on the floor of the House. So that's a big deal for me to make sure people know. Second, as far as what the first day is, I will tell you this. I know that the Railroad Commission has done task forces, you know, the oil and gas have done task forces. You know what? I'm going to go with the environmentalists, who have done a lot of work. They have done the research, have been pointed out. So I'm there first with them because the Oil and Gas Commission and the oil and gas companies give the perspective. I think the environmentalists give the people's perspective, which is the Democratic perspective, because they have been involved with the Democratic Party for years. And as it relates to how to work with people, I'm going to tell you, I was there 20 years. The last 6 years, I was on calendars. I was in pensions. I was in higher ed. And why is that so important? How do I get support for democratic values from Republicans? For 7.5 billion for those folks that are in the audience, are no people that are teachers or state employees, that we fix the pension, to help teachers get more funding, to get schools to get more funding, that we have more funding for transportation, that we get funding for democratic values, and yes, decisions and votes for labor. In the country, as you pointed out, I was the national president of the labor legislators in the country. And in the legislature, I was able to work with all legislators because yes, we're going to fight to the death as Democrats and Republicans. But once the election is over, we got to talk. And have I done that? Have I done that? Yes. Because we don't debate and our differences and how you're a bad guy and all that kind of stuff. We do that in the election. And I'll tell you this, so I've been there. And as I conclude, I want to thank Congressman Mark Vesey. Let me tell you why. When he ran and was in the runoff, I endorsed him. In this election, when I decided to run, I asked him for support because we are both Democrats. We work together as legislators, him as a congressman, me as a state rep. I asked him for support. You know what he said? You know, I told Chrysta I was going to support her, Alonso, but now that you're running, I'm going to stay out of it because I respect you. I know your work, and that's how it's going to be. So I thank him for considering. I thank all the people of Fort Worth and Tarrant County. And again, as you pointed out, yes, Beto lost by 3 points, but yes, he won Tarrant County. And because of you, the whole state is excited. If Tarrant County can turn blue, and you are the catalyst, folks, of Tarrant County, if Tarrant County can turn blue, Texas can turn blue. And I'm a part of that. God bless
Thank
you
you,
all.
Roberto.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Roberto, very much. And thank you, Chrysta. Thank you both for your time. Thank you for running for office. I just want to wrap up here by saying this runoff election will take place on July 14th of 2020. However, early voting begins on June 29th. Please put June 29th on your calendar. If you're listening to my voice, put June 29th on your calendar. Make sure you vote in this runoff election. Make sure you do your research on these two candidates for running for the Railroad Commission of Texas. This is one of the most important offices in our state. Thank you both for running. Thank you for honoring me by letting me moderate y'all. And good luck in the race. And I'm going to say that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. And if anyone, and thank you so much, Roman, I kind of had to jump on my cell phone, but this was a fantastic discussion.
All right, well, good thing. Thanks to the Tarrant County Democrats. You're wonderful.
Yeah, I might call on you again, Roman, to do more moderating, maybe.
Okay, you do that anytime. Happy to do
Perfect.
so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Roman. Bye, everybody.